I want to take some time and talk to you about the Dallas Cowboys. If you Google or search who are the Dallas Cowboys, uh, the answer you'll get is pretty simple. The Dallas Cowboys are a professional American football team based in the Dallas Fort Worth area. Um, the Cowboys compete in the National Football League as a member club of the league's National Football Conference in the Eastern Division. At least that's according to Wikipedia. Um, if you search online or on Amazon for Dallas Cowboys, numerous things pop up. Different things that you can purchase, anything from shirts, caps, and jerseys to toys, um, lamps. You can find different stuff for your cars. You'll find books, right? There's a book called Tales from the Dallas Cowboys Sidelines, which was written by one of the members of the Cowboys of the 70s, Cliff Harris. This is another really good book that I found, and it's called Boys Will Be Boys, The Glory Days and the Party Nights of the Dallas Cowboys Dynasty. And that one was written by Jeff Pearlman, and it talks about the stuff that would happen at the games and then after the games with the players in the 90s. Um, but the team is more than that. It's a lot more than that. It is one of the most recognizable brands in the world. Um, they are recognized by their name, by their tradition, um, the emblem, the 5-pointed star, um, the triple star on their helmet, like on my patch here on my shirt. Um, but even the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders. But to truly understand who the Dallas Cowboys are, you have to dig a little bit deeper than that. Um, you have to look at how the Cowboys got started, right? The history and the story of how Clint Murchison came about um, obtaining an expansion team in Dallas. You have to look at the starting um, the way the team started in the 60s, the struggles that they had, the things that they had to do and endure to finally get through and start winning. Those teams of the late 60s and early 70s, um, when they received the moniker of America's team. And then the 80s, where they continued to win, but weren't winning championships. And then the 90s, right, which I think is probably the most recognized and remembered teams with the triplets, Troy Aikman, Emmett Smith, and Michael Irvin. But the Dallas Cowboys started as an expansion team in the year 1960. In fact, they were awarded an expansion team, but by the time they received the team, the league had already had its draft. Um, so to be fair, the league allowed the Dallas Cowboys to select players from different teams. But as I'm sure you would surmise, the teams weren't going to allow them to pick their best players. So every team had to put a couple of players into a pool, but they put the worst players on their team. So the Cowboys ended up uh, with a really bad team in 1961. So bad, in fact, that they didn't win a single game. But I get ahead of myself. Let's go back and talk about Clint Murchison, the founding owner of the Dallas Cowboys. Clint Murchison was actually trying to buy a team and bring it to Dallas in the 1950s. As a matter of fact, he had struck a deal in 1958 with Clint Murchison, with Marshall, the owner of the Washington Redskins. They actually struck a deal to buy to where Marshall would sell the team to Murchison, and Murchison was going to bring the team to Dallas. But at the last minute, Marshall changed some of the uh, stipulations of the deal, and Murchison didn't like it, and they called the deal off. That just caused some bitterness between the two of them. So instead, Clint Murchison attempted to start his own team. but Marshall would not have it. His team, the Washington Redskin football team, was uh, the team that was furthest south at that time. So he had a really strong hold on everything south of Washington D.C. He had that entire market, so he didn't want to let it go. Back in those days, the owners would get together and decide on who could and who could not get a new team. And the only difference between now and then is that all it took was one vote. One vote said no, and that was it. So, of course, Marshall kept blocking it, kept blocking it and blocking it and blocking it. But at the same time, Marshall had a dispute with a gentleman by the name of Barney Bernskin. Barney Bernskin actually put together the song for the Washington Redskins. He did the music for "Hail to the Chief." Marshall's wife actually was the one that did the lyrics, but Bernskin put the song together, and he did the copyright, so he owned the song. So when he found out that Marshall, who he was upset with, had a dispute with Murchison, he sold him the rights. So then Murchison approved Marshall and advised them that he now owned the song, and he was not going to allow him to play the song anymore. That infuriated Marshall. But he finally gave in, and he knew he had no choice, so he voted yes, and that's how the Dallas Cowboys came about. They finally were approved an expansion team and were able to start their first year in 1961. But again, that year was horrible. They had 0 wins, 11 losses, and 1 tie, and they were ecstatic about that tie. The following year, the Cowboys would finally start drafting players. They were able to give away a couple of draft picks and got Eddie LeBaron as their quarterback. They also drafted Don Meredith off of some draft picks or trading draft picks. But the very first pick that the Dallas Cowboys selected was Bob Lilly, who to this day is known as Mr. Cowboy. He was the first ever draft pick of the Dallas Cowboys, and he was a great player. He was a member of the Dallas Cowboys for several years. And, that's when the winning tradition started. In 1965, the team actually hit 500. According to Dallas Cowboy website, the team was able to start some really good winning traditions. 1966 and 1967, they were the Eastern Conference champions. Of course, for the NFL championship game, they played against the Green Bay Packers, and as luck would have it, they lost both games. The game in 1967 is actually the coldest game in history. People's fingers were really suffering. It's actually known as the Ice Bowl. In 1968 and 1969, again, the Cowboys had 2 back-to-back winning seasons, and they won the division title. But of course, they lost to the Cleveland Browns. At that time, the nickname that they were getting was next year's champions, because they just could not get it done at the end. But between 1970 and 1979, the Cowboys won a total of 105 games, 105 regular season games, which is an outstanding feat and is still a record today. But then the Cowboys started winning. In the 70s, they started going to the Super Bowls. 1971, they won the Super Bowl. But then they lost the following year. And at that time, the league was putting together, not the league, was NFL Films were putting together sort of like a year in review videos. And they were putting together the video for the Dallas Cowboys, and could not come up with the proper title for it. They were thinking about it. How do we come up with a good title for a team that is very famous all across America, but it's not the champion. You can't say last year's champion. Um, so the gentleman was thinking about it and thinking about it, and he finally came up with the moniker America's Team. It was John Facenda in 1978 was narrating the film for NFL films. Um, and the line that he thought of, and it's the opening line to the video, says, "They appear on television so often that their faces are as familiar to the public as presidents and movie stars. They are the Dallas Cowboys, America's team." Now, some people may not have been able to take advantage of that, but um, Clint Murchison had put some really strong folks in some really key positions. He had hired Tex Schramm, who used to be a CBS Sports analyst and um, general manager for the Los Angeles Rams. He was put in a position to be the general manager for the Dallas Cowboys. He also brought in Gil Brandt, who was the scout for the San Francisco 49ers. He just had a keen eye for talent, was able to find folks like Thomas Hollywood Henderson, Golden Richards, Tony Dorsett, Roger Staubach, even Danny White. So he had a keen eye to find talent among players. But I think the most critical piece was Tom Landry, who happened to be a defensive coach at that time for the New York Giants. He just came up with really good, innovative strategies for football that set the team apart. Flex defense. Before you knew it, you had Captain America, Roger Staubach, on one side with Tony Dorsett running the ball, and the Doomsday defense on the other side. Folks like Cliff Harris, making a difference for the team. But as time moved on, we come into the 80s, and the team was winning in the beginning of the 80s, but towards the latter part of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, they were losing their stronghold. Time had passed Tom Landry by, and Jerry Jones was the new owner of the Dallas Cowboys, and came in, and he brought in Jimmy Johnson. And then they started their winning ways. In the 70s, the Dallas Cowboys had gone to 5 Super Bowls and won 2 of them. In the 80s, they won 105 games. But in the 90s, the Dallas Cowboys went to 3 Super Bowls within 4 years. A feat that was outstanding when that happened. But then the team starts to decline again, and we're going through those building stages again. And every year we say we're going back to the Super Bowl. This is our year. This is our year. So those are the 2 things that you hear now. How about them Cowboys? And this is our year. Hopefully, this is our year. But the new owner of the Dallas Cowboys, Jerry Jones, who bought the team for $150 million in 1989, has been able to make some really good deals, some really good decisions that have really cemented his legacy. According to Forbes, the team is currently worth over $8 billion. And the way he's done that is by making sure that the Cowboys stay relevant. He's done some things that have revolutionized how the NFL does business, and everything from sponsorship and television to stadium designs. He's in a class of his own, says Mark Gannis, president of the consulting firm Sports Corp. When Jerry took over, the league used to do things a certain way. They all shared the same sponsorships, shared revenue. All of the sponsorships were with the same company, right? For instance, the NFL had sponsorship with Coca-Cola. Well, Jerry goes and signs a deal with Pepsi. They had deals with Reebok. Jerry goes and signs with Nike. Um, so he starts making all this money, a lot of money, and the league didn't like it. You know, here's Jerry Jones signing deals with American Express, Nike, Dr. Pepper, Pepsi, and upsetting the NFL's licensing arm. Um, and in the process, um, he gets sued. He gets sued by the league for $300 million in 1995 because he had violated the league's wide sponsorship agreement. So what does Jerry do? Jerry countersues for $750 million in an antitrust lawsuit, and a month later, he won. You know, he wins the lawsuit. The NFL decides to make a deal with him, and the rest is history. Now, all these teams are able to benefit from this. You see all these new stadiums, Las Vegas, LA, everywhere. You know, you got all these really beautiful stadiums coming up everywhere because of some of the things that Jerry did. Um, it was that kind of bold thinking that led him to build the NFL's first $1 billion venue. It opened in 2009 and was called AT&T. Well, it was called Cowboys Stadium. Is now called AT&T Stadium because he leased out those agreements to AT&T. Um, but the team has had a rich history of tradition. They started playing in the Cotton Bowl in downtown Dallas, Texas. Um, that was their initial home for 11 years, from 1960 to 1971. From there, they moved over to Irving, Texas, at Texas Stadium. Um, you know, it's the stadium that had the famous roof and hole in the roof, and the reason for that was so that people would say was so that God could watch His favorite team play football on Sundays. And of course now AT&T Stadium, which sits up to 80,000 people, but it can expand. It can expand so that it can sit up to 100,000 people. Um, the special feature of that stadium is the television or the scoreboard that they have, right? So it encompasses from the 20-yard line to the 20-yard line, and it's huge. It's 160 by 72, and it is the largest television in the world. But it's moves like these that have helped Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys transcend the world of football and the world of sports. Um, that it is an organization and a team that is known across the world. If you walk into a bar, if you walk into a barber shop, or if you even sit down to talk with some of the folks at where you work, and somebody mentions the Dallas Cowboys, the room will split in half. On one side, you'll have people that hate the Cowboys, and on the other side, you'll have the people that love them. No other team in any sport drums up that much emotion because the Dallas Cowboys are America's team.